Hello, I'm Whalley, welcome to Lenscraft. Today we're looking at softproofing using On1 Photo RAW 2020. Whilst I'm using 2020, On1 Photo RAW 2018 was the first version with the softproofing and works in the same way. Softproofing is a process used to prepare an image for printing. We need to do this because the colours and the brightness of our image won't match our screens when printed. Let's take one of my images as an example. The first step was to calibrate my screen so that I know what I see is an accurate representation of the image. I then applied my adjustments and corrections to the image and it now looks the way I want it to. You can see the original image if I toggle the preview off. If I hadn't calibrated my screen, I could be looking at an orange in the clouds when in fact the clouds are red in the image. When I printed the image, if the clouds came out red, I might blame the printer rather than the screen. That's why using a calibrated monitor is important. Now, assuming my screen is accurately displaying the image, if I just print it, the print still wouldn't match what I'm seeing on screen. That's because the printer and paper I use can't reproduce the same colours and tones as my screen. How different the results appear depend on the printer and paper and type of ink that I'm using. The way to check what the print will look like before we print the image is where softproofing comes in. When I softproof the image, On1 simulates the printed image on the screen. The softproof allows me to check and make further adjustments so that the print looks how I want it to. If you're thinking this doesn't apply to you because you send your photos to a lab to print, I've got bad news. The same problem exists with every printer, even those used by labs. It's because the computer screens can typically represent more colours and tones than paper and printers. Now you understand why softproofing is important, let's look at the softproofing features in On1. Because softproofing involves adjusting an image, you'll find it in the Edit module. You can toggle it on and off using the Enable Softproofing option in the View menu. When I turn it on, you'll see the background around the preview changes to white. This helps you imagine how the image looks when it's printed to white paper. The colours of the background affect how we perceive the image. It therefore makes sense that we should match it to the colour of the paper. Next, I need to select the printer profile to use for softproofing in the View menu. The printer profile is an information file that instructs the software how to simulate the printer and paper combination you're using. Each printer profile is unique to the combination of printer module, ink and paper you're using. You must select the one that matches what you're printing with. Currently, I have 3 printer profiles loaded. If I wanted to use a different profile, I'd need to load it using the menu option. The 3 profiles I have are for different photo speed papers, but all of them use an Epson Stylus Pro 3880 printer. When I change between the profiles, you can see the softproof change to show how the print looks on that paper. Notice how both the brightness and the colours change just by changing the paper. That's why it's critical to use the correct profile for your printer and paper combination. You can't substitute a different profile because it produces the wrong result. The reason the colour and the brightness both changed when I changed the profile is because the different papers represent colours and tones differently. Some papers will shift the colour to look warmer or cooler than it is. Equally, some papers can't reproduce a deep black the way that a screen can. The result is a print that looks different to your screen. To help see this difference, use the Simulate Paper and Ink option in the View menu. When we use this, the softproof preview tries to simulate the paper and ink used for a print. What you're now seeing is how your print will look when it comes off the printer. Notice how the colours aren't as saturated and the blacks are much lighter. That's because we're simulating the PhotoSpeed Matte Ultra paper, and matte papers struggle to reproduce deep blacks. If I switch the profile now for PhotoSpeed Natural Soft Texture, you'll see the colours become warmer, but blacks are still light because it's another matte paper. But if I switch to a profile for a brighter paper which isn't matte, you'll see a deeper black. I can also toggle the softproofing off and on using the icon at the bottom of the screen. You'll notice there isn't much difference between the original image and the brighter softproof. This is one reason why some people say they never need to softproof and their prints always match their screens. We can also check to see which colours and tones our paper is struggling to reproduce by turning on the Gamut warning in the View menu. On1 then highlights the problem areas in red. These are the colours and tones that are falling out of Gamut. When a colour or tone's out of Gamut, it's either a colour that can't be reproduced using your printer and paper, or it's a tone that's too dark or too light for the chosen printer and paper. If I switch to the natural soft texture printer profile, you'll see less problems in the bright colours, but there's more problems in the shadows. That's because natural soft texture paper handles colour and tone differently to the brighter paper. When a printer tries to print something that's out of Gamut, in other words it can't accurately reproduce that colour or tone, it still needs to print something. If it didn't, you'd have prints full of gaps. To do this, it replaces the problem pixels with something it can print. It determines this using something called a rendering intent. Whilst there are at least 4 rendering intents I can think of, there are only 2 you probably need to know, and On1 supports these. The first is relative rendering. This replaces the out of Gamut areas with the nearest colour and tone the printer and paper can handle. But whilst it changes these areas, it doesn't change any other area in the image. The other rendering intent is perceptual. This fixes the out of Gamut areas by redistributing all the image colours and tones across the entire range the printer and paper can handle. In this image, most of the problem areas are too dark for the paper. The perceptual rendering intent therefore makes the image appear brighter than the relative intent because it lightens all the tones. This preserves the relationship between all the shadow tones, which in this image is probably best. Alternatively, you can decide which of the 2 you like best, and when you come to print, select that option. If you're sending your prints to a lab, it's best to check which rendering intent they use. If they don't know, it's probably best to assume it will be perceptual rendering. When I demonstrated the 2 rendering intents, you may have noticed I turned off the simulate paper and ink option. That's because the rendering intent doesn't work with that option turned on. You should now understand how your images will look when printed, as well as how the colours and tones will change. If you don't like the way the softproof looks, you have 2 choices. First, you could switch to a paper that copes better with the image you're printing. Alternatively, you could adjust the image to compensate for the printing process. In the next video, I'll explain how to make these changes. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, please share it with other On1 users and don't forget to subscribe. I'm Whalley, you've been watching Lenscraft. I'll see you soon for another video.